Hello, everybody. Welcome to a Psychedelics Today webinar with me. I am David Drapkin, the Director of Education and Training at Psychedelics Today. And I'm being joined by Kate Cotter. She is the co-founder and executive director of the Nevada Coalition for Psychedelic Medicines, which is a 501c4 nonprofit dedicated to education, advocacy, and policy reform around psychedelics. And Kate is also the co-founder and executive director of the Sierra Psychedelic Society. And most importantly, is also a graduate of the Vital program that I'm also part of, creating and managing. So it's awesome to have you here, Kate. How are you doing today?
Thank you. It's wonderful to be here. I'm really excited about this and I appreciate the opportunity. I'm doing great.
Yeah, awesome. We started off our first ever conversation in an interview for Vital. I assume you remember. And
Absolutely.
when I first met you, I was just so grateful that you were doing what you were doing in Nevada. And I think that was probably before it all kind of ended up working out. And you're going to be talking to us about, what has happened in Nevada, over the last few years. So a nice place to start is, because we're celebrating Vital for all of the amazing impacts our students have had in the world, and that we've got our fourth cohort, which is starting September 17th, and applications are open until August 23rd. So in celebration of that, what was your Vital journey like? Maybe starting from the beginning, like where were you when we had that first chat? What was the point of joining Vital? Like, what did you hope to get from it?
Thank you for asking that. The Vital training experience for me was foundational. It was an incredible experience. And I was well into my journey. We had founded Sierra Psychedelics Society. And I believe at that point, we also had founded Nevada Coalition for Psychedelic Medicines, but it was in the very early stages. And I have been called to this work because psychedelics have been the single greatest, most profound tool for my own healing and personal growth. And I have felt a deep sense of calling and mission to do what I can to help create access, especially here in Nevada. And so when I'll never forget, a dear friend, Rebecca Stetson, had sent me the information about Vital and said, I think you should sign up for this. And I started reading about all of the interdisciplinary elements of with Jungian theory and science and just this broad spectrum with the top names in the field. And I immediately had this surge of, I have to do this training. And so I was incredibly grateful. I was a very grateful recipient of a scholarship, which without that, I wouldn't have been able to do it. And that has fueled my work here in Nevada and has trickled down to our community in so many ways. As you know, I was in your study group, and you and Johanna are just both exquisitely gifted facilitators, but I have learned so much, and I've been able to take that back to my community, which is one of the primary reasons that I wanted to join that training. And so yes, I can't thank you enough for the work that you're doing and for Psychedelics Today, putting the program together. And it's very, very meaningful for me to be back here to do this webinar and to share how far we've come and how I've been able to take that knowledge back to Nevada. And so thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so good to see what you've done. And maybe as just as a final question about your own Vital journey, your integration project, Kate. So, for everyone that doesn't know, Vital is a 12-month course, and then it's got the alumni network and program, which is still pretty high touch for the rest of your life. But at the end of the 12 months, every student presents in their small group an integration project. And so your project was about this amazing work that you're doing in Nevada, and you actually showed the video that we're going to see some of today in this webinar, where you're actually speaking, I think, at the state Senate or Assembly. And that was just incredible to see. Wow, look how you're putting your education and training into practice. But I think it was just the strength of the conviction of what you're doing is right, and you have to do it, and you're going to help the community to actually make it happen. So I don't know, for me, that was just a beautiful thing when you did that, presentation to our small group.
Thank you. Yes. So the Senate bill had been introduced about February when the session started, and then our vital training started in April. And so the trajectory of my experience with vital closely mapped onto the trajectory of the legislative experience in Nevada, which I'll talk more about, but we meet every other year. And so this was this pivotal moment for me, and so much happened during that year. And during that time, I was learning so much from the program, and I had learned about Dr. Manesh Gurn and Dr. Melanie Pincus, and I believe at the time they were offering electives through Vital, but I had also taken the Psychedelics Neuroscience Demystified course through Psychedelics Today, and that was also fantastic. And that gave me an incredible breadth of knowledge to be able to advocate for the medicines and talk with legislators and understand the science. And so, I can't speak more highly of that than it had a huge impact on my life. So being able to share with our group and the Vital community just how much learning what I had learned in the program, and feeling fueled by the inspiration, and also the sense of camaraderie and community, that there are all these like-minded people that are working toward the same thing in their own ways, the same thing being growth and healing for our communities and expanding this network. So I was very buoyed by the experience, and it made a huge impact on me. And I like to think I brought that back to my community and state, and I was thrilled to share it and to talk more about it today.
Yeah. Before we jump in, I'll just say that that elective is still happening in Vital. So Melanie and Manish is still doing that Vital elective, but they've also turned that course that you did, Neuroscience Demystified, into an on-demand self-study course. So students can do it in their own time. So I'll pop that into the chat box here. That's at psychedeliceducationcenter.com. A final question before I hand it over to you, Kate. We're talking a lot about Nevada, which is one of 50 states in America, which is one of 200 and something countries in the world. So why is it important for states, local communities, to take the lead with regulation and legislation when it comes to psychedelic access and use? Why not wait for federal laws and policies to change? Or why not just wait for USONA, Compass Pathways, and maybe Lycos, who knows, to get the medicine, into the hospitals and clinics? Why is it important to work on these state levels now?
That is a question, and that's a question that comes up a lot. Why not wait for federal approval? And there are a number of reasons, as evidenced by last Friday's FDA rejection of the Lycos new drug application for MDMA-assisted therapy. With the federal approval process, from the initial preclinical research, which can take 1 to 3 years, and then the clinical trials can take 6 to 8. The new drug application can 6 to 10 months, and this is all variable, but the whole process can take 8 to 12 years. And then, as we saw with Lycos, even after completing the phase 3 trials and the new drug application, roadblock, asking for more phase 3 trials. And so if we can start expediting access, working at the state and local level, then we can start tailoring the regulations to our state and local needs, and we're not waiting for federal approval. And we've seen this with the cannabis legislation, where it's been nearly 2 decades since the Compassionate Use Act of 1996 was passed in California. And we now have 38 states that have legalized for medical and 24 that have legalized for recreational, and we still don't have federal approval. So this is largely a question as well with mental health, and there's an urgency about that. And when I share my slides, I'll go into that a little bit deeper, but this is a very timely and important conversation to be having.
Without further ado, Kate, over to you. There are awesome slides in the video too. So yeah, thanks so much for the work you're doing. And yeah, if anyone would like to ask a question, just pop it into the Q&A box at the bottom there, and we'll hopefully have 10 to 15 minutes at the end to ask Kate some questions. Thanks so much, Kate.
Thank you, and I really appreciate it again for having me. This is a topic that I am very passionate about. So As we know, we're talking about psychedelic policy reform today, both the importance of the state and local initiatives and also what's happening with our efforts here in Nevada. And as we were just discussing, many reasons for not waiting for federal approval. One of the important, maybe in my opinion, the most important question here is that, and I realize I'm preaching to the choir on this, our state and our country and many places in the world are struggling with a mental health crisis, and our current treatments are ineffective and failing. And just to share some statistics here, we have approximately 13 million American adults suffering from PTSD, and this is a staggering number. Many of these people are veterans or survivors of sexual assault or domestic abuse. We also have 1 in 5 US adults that experience a mental illness each year, 1 in 20 with a serious mental illness each year. On average, 1 person in the US dies by suicide every 11 minutes. And on average, we lose 17 to 44 veterans per day to suicide. And the 44, the upper number comes from Operation Deep Dive, which accounts for overdoses and such that might not be included in the other data. So what are the alternatives to prohibition? And there are a number of classifications. And I'm going to do a brief overview of 8 of these. Not everything falls neatly into one of these categories, but it's a really helpful discussion to orient us to the conversation, because a lot of these terms are used interchangeably, so it can get a little bit confusing, but this can provide some clarity, I hope. So the first category, we have research, and sometimes funding is involved with this, sometimes not. We have 10 states that have passed state legislation that have established study group or a working group. And the point of these groups is to study the policy that's happening in other states and to study the therapeutic potential for psychedelics. And in the case of Nevada, we'll put together a report for the next legislative session as to our findings, and hopefully that will promote new legislative efforts. We also have the next one is deprioritization. And this is a really interesting one because this is lowest law enforcement priority. And you might be familiar with the decriminalized nature initiatives that have passed in 24 cities and 2 counties. And these would be commonly referred to as quote unquote decriminalizing. And in these cases, it's entheogenic plants and fungi, psilocybin containing mushrooms, mescaline containing cacti. Most of these cities exempt peyote. We also have iboga and DMT and ayahuasca, but it's not true decriminalization. As the name would imply, it makes it the lowest law enforcement priority. And some of these cities then, in addition, they put limits on the enforcement funding. So what this would look like is, say you have a mayor and the city council and they put together the budget for the law enforcement, they would simply not allocate any funding to prosecute the offenses. So then that's another layer of defense. And then the next category is defelonization. And this is where it will reduce the penalties to something lower than a felony. It's still not legal, and these still might be criminal offenses, such as misdemeanors, but they're less criminal. New Jersey has done a statewide passage of an initiative that defelonized psilocybin statewide. And then we have what is considered true decriminalization, which reduces the penalties down from a criminal offense to something that would be an infraction or a civil fine. And then we have legalization of cultivation and sharing. And this would be the grow, gather, give model. And a good example would be Prop 122, part of their legislation for the Natural Medicine Health Act, where adults are allowed to use, possess, cultivate, and have non-transactional sharing of the natural substances. So they try to avoid distribution, usually smaller quantities, no money involved. And then we have legalization of supervised consumption, and this would be like the regulated access market for psychedelic therapy, as Oregon and Colorado have passed. And then this usually includes licensing for cultivation, manufacturing, testing, and the facilitators. And then you can have a full legalization model with a regulated market, and there would still be limits in terms of the regulations on age and taxes and whatnot, but it would be akin to what we see with alcohol and tobacco and some of the cannabis legislation, where essentially you could walk into a dispensary and buy something off the shelf. And so currently we have 8 states that have active legislation, varying degrees along this spectrum. And Nevada will soon be back on this list. All goes as planned. Our legislature meets every other year. So last year, we passed Psychedelic Medicines Working Group. This was SB 242. And initially, the bill was introduced as a decrim bill. And it's important to note that we had been working probably, I want to say, for a year and a half, maybe, with Decriminalized Nature Nevada, trying to introduce some local initiatives like they had passed in some of the other cities. And we were running into a bit of a roadblock because Nevada is what is called a Dillon's Rule state, as opposed to a home rule state. And in a Dillon's Rule state, the local governments are restricted to the powers that are expressly given to them by the state, whereas in a home rule state, the local municipalities have a lot more autonomy. And so we were delighted when the bill initially was slated to decriminalize psilocybin. It was a small amount for personal possession, 4 ounces or less, for 18 years or older. And then there was also a component of the bill that would have been for research, where psilocybin and MDMA would have been decriminalized for 18 and older for research purposes. But you have to understand too, Nevada is a very different culture from Oregon and Colorado. And when we had our state elections in November 2022, the governor's office changed hands from Democrat Steve Sisolak to Republican Governor Joe Lombardo, who is also a retired sheriff. And so we went into session with a split government because the Democrats had control of both the houses. And so after evaluating the bill, it was decided that probably wasn't going to fly in Nevada at this time. So it was amended to a study group, to a working group. And what this did is it allowed us a chance to really open up the conversation in Nevada. It also, at this time, we realized that it was critical to have a bipartisan, we'll call it multi-partisan approach. And so myself, I'm a progressive, moderate progressive, got together with Bruno Moya, who's a Marine combat veteran, and John Dalton, who's a retired Navy SEAL. And we founded Nevada Coalition for Psychedelic Medicines, which, as you mentioned before, is a 501c4. And we champion psychedelic policy reform through advocacy, education, and collaboration. And we wanted to work with legislators to help pass SB 242. Our vision is to create a future where everyone has safe access to psychedelic therapies for healing, wellness, and effective mental health. And we have an incredible team in our coalition, very bipartisan, made up of mental health and medical professionals, global health experts, veterans, first responders, former law enforcement, community advocates, educators, neuroscientists. And so we started having conversations with legislators and law enforcement. And John, who is now our president, with his background in the SEAL teams, was able to connect with the conservative ethos and their concerns, as well as the law enforcement. And we had some really generative conversations where we could educate. And during this time, I would talk about the neuroscience and the research. And as I was mentioning, thanks to psychedelics science demystified and the work of Dr. Manesh Kern and Dr. Melanie Pincus, this was huge for me, being able to have these dialogues. And so where we had started at the beginning of the session, known as the Shroom Bill, found at the legislature, we had 3 legislators in support, including our 2 lead sponsors, Senator Rochelle Wynn, who championed the bill. She is a criminal defense attorney, mother of 4, all around total badass. This woman has entirely earned my respect. And Assemblyman Max Carter, who is also very sincere, very authentic, inspires greatly with his personal testimony. He has tagged our coined our tagline locally, healing loudly. He really cares. Under their leadership, by the end of the session, we had 9 co-sponsors from both sides of the aisle, and we passed with a landslide. It was 16-4 on the Senate floor and 40-0 on the Assembly floor. And throughout all of this, the community was a pivotal part of that. And so when I had been talking with legislators several years ago, they had asked about the possibility of getting the community to back them up, which was part of the inspiration to found Sierra Psychedelic Society, which is dedicated to providing education and promoting risk management and building community. And this did several things. One, it established credibility. It started to reduce the stigma. We became a resource for mental health and medical professionals. We have a monthly educational series, workshops, trainings. Dr. Manesh Gurn actually came out and did a workshop, trainings for our therapists and also the community on psychedelic science. We have 2 to 5 integration circles a week, monthly breathwork series. And so it started to collectively bring about a deeper understanding of the nature of psychedelic medicines and therapies. And furthermore, it mobilized grassroots community support for these legislative hearings where people would come out and provide public comment and give personal testimonies. So I'd like to show a short video illustrate some of the process with the community working with these hearings. And I'd also like to acknowledge and give a shout out to our friends that are working hard to build community with the Las Vegas Psychedelic Society and Decriminalized Nature Nevada and Tahoe Psychedelic Society. So I'll play this video here.
My name is Rochelle Wynn, and I proudly represent Senate District 3, and I'm here to present Senate Bill 242.
My name is Max Carter, M-A-X-C-A-R-T-E-R. I'm Assemblyman from District 12, which is the east side of Las Vegas, base of Sunrise Mountain. I'm very open. I believe in healing loudly, and that's why I'm talking here today.
I think this is the first time that we have discussed this topic in the state. I see that we have people in the overflow room here in Carson, as well as this room packed up, and it looks like there's about 40 or so people that are in Las Vegas to testify on this bill. And if I could just get a show of hands, how many times this is a first-time voter for people, or a first-time participant in the legislative process, if you could raise your hands. And also in Las Vegas. That just brings me a lot of joy.
Good afternoon, committee members. My name is Brian Lang. My lifetime works in medical and psychiatric quality improvement. Basically, how do we do a better job healing our communities?
There's a difference between 28 grams of mushrooms and 28 grams of fentanyl.
And thank you, Senator Wynn. I do appreciate you bringing this bill forward, because we do have to have a discussion about this and continuing to not allow any study or any research on drugs that have been available for time immemorial. It has to go past. We have to get rid of that.
We have former police officers, firefighters, Navy SEALs, EOD techs, Marines, ER nurses, trauma surgeons, all who have seen and experienced an overwhelming amount of human suffering, which has devastating effects on their mental health and families. These compounds provide the miracle of psychological healing, and I have seen marriages saved, relationships restored, suicides prevented, and addictions healed. I was a soldier on the war on drugs. Now I'm a soldier of healing. I don't care to be an outlaw, but I will do what I must do to bring this healing to my brothers and sisters of service. I appeal to you to pass this bill.
And it's also very important to note that psilocybin has been used safely by experienced and skilled practitioners of traditional medicine in multiple cultures for millennia. Recent major national surveys also indicate low rates of abuse, low rates of treatment seeking, and low rates of reported harm resulting from psilocybin use.
Justin Hines for the record. Given the growing body of evidence supporting the safety, the efficacy of psilocybin, we urge you to consider growing body of research that we brought for you today and consider Bill 242.
I was emotionally numb and hypervigilant, but in 2018, after my first experience with psychedelics, that changed.
That we can actually help people, and we can help people in the rurals where practitioners aren't going. So Dr. Titus doesn't have to be the only one out there helping folks all alone.
I owe my life to this medicine. These compounds are remarkable, and we have an extraordinary opportunity to bring healing to countless lives.
You know, even Navy SEALs need heroes, and in this case, Senator Wynne is that hero since she's been advancing and pushing this forward. Your bravery goes well noticed.
I stand here now in support of the policy reform around psychedelic medicine for widely accepted legalization access, especially for our first responders in need of non-addictive, profound treatment for mental health. This legislation has the opportunity to save the lives of those warrior servants who protect us, and yet are also the most likely demographic to fall victim to suicide from injuries occurred on the job.
We know it works. We know how it works. And again, here's some of the research done by Nevadans in my lab showing that if you take a normal neuron and give it psychedelics, you give it new chances to make new connections.
Our mission is to make communities safer by focusing police resources on the greatest threat to public safety and working towards healing police-community relations.
Psychedelics, interestingly, not only do not lead to addiction, but they have the potential to treat addiction.
I serve as a living testament to the remarkable healing capabilities of psilocybin.
You know, this is kind of outside our wheelhouse usually, but, you know, we care about our brothers and sisters, and we're willing to do anything we can to help save them.
So that brings us to where we are now, preparing for the 2025 session. Like I said, Nevada meets every other year. So we are planning to introduce two bills at least, one for reduced penalties, which would hopefully reduce it down to something like an infraction or a civil fine, and then also a regulated access market for legalized access to psychedelic therapy. And the reason that we are doing this two-pronged approach is manifold. In regard to the reduced penalties, I think we can all agree that no one should be going to jail for mushrooms in their closet. So this is an important part of criminal justice reform, but it also is a matter of public safety and risk management and trying to bring this out from the underground so that people who are seeking support and guidance are able to get it without fear of penalty. But we don't want to stop just at the reduced penalties because as we spoke about earlier, decriminalization is still not legal. And so for those who are seeking a legal pathway, notably active military and first responders and anyone who is struggling with PTSD or serious mental health conditions, we want to make sure that they can legally access this, which brings us back to the mental health piece. In Nevada, we have approximately 109,000 adults with a serious mental illness, approximately 474,000 adults in Nevada suffering from a mental health condition. And last year, we lost 657 people to suicide, with approximately 107,000 adults with suicidal ideation. So we are definitely feeling a sense of urgency about getting something across the finish line. It is still a little bit early for us to know exactly what these bills will entail and what the regulations will look like. And one of the reasons for this is that we are waiting to see what our November election for the state will bring. There is a possibility that we may end up having a supermajority of Democrats in both houses. And our great hope and our goal is to be working with the governor's office. However, if there is a supermajority, that makes it possible to pass legislation without the governor's signature. And so that might inform the nature of what some of the bills could look like. And so in the meantime, we are learning everything that we can from the models in Oregon and Colorado, what can be improved upon. And as many people know, in 2020, Oregon passed measures 109 and 110. 110 decriminalized a boatload of substances, including psychedelics, and some of that legislation is being rolled back. For the sake of today's conversation, focusing on measure 109, which established a regulated market, the legalization for supervised consumption, where people can legally seek psilocybin therapy at a service center under the supervision of a facilitator. And then in 2022, Colorado passed Proposition 122, the Natural Medicines Health Act, and that did a number of things. It also established a regulated access market, along with the opportunity to expand the substances in 2026 to include ibogaine, DMT, mescaline, with the exclusion of peyote. They created an American Tribes and Indigenous Community Working Group to make regulatory recommendations. And then they also legalized the Grow, Gather, Give model for 21 and over, consumption, possession, growth, and the non-transactional sharing of psilocybin, psilocin, DMT from ayahuasca, ibogaine, and mescaline, excluding peyote. And so what is really, really fascinating is to see some of the similarities and differences where Oregon has learned from Colorado and where they've expanded or done something different. So I'm going to do just a quick broad brushstrokes of some of these points. Both Oregon and Colorado have facilitator licenses. Oregon has a standard facilitator license, and then Colorado has a tiered licensing program where they have the standard facilitator license, but they also have a dual licensing for those that are clinicians that are state licensed as a mental health or medical professional. They can also have a clinical license. And then they've added a distinguished educator license and a training license. And with Colorado, all the facilitator licenses are under the auspices of the Department of Regulatory Agencies, DORA. In Oregon, we have all of the licenses are all under the Oregon Health Authority, which then has a subsidiary that was created, the Oregon Psilocybin Services. So in Oregon, we have a service center license. In Colorado, we have a healing center license. Both have a manufacturer license. Oregon has a laboratory facility license. Colorado has a testing facility license. And then they additionally have a cultivator license and a transporter license. And those last five, the healing, manufacturer, testing, cultivator, and transporter, are under a different agency, the Department of Revenue. And then when it comes to the service centers and the healing centers, there are a few key differences. So in Oregon, the facilitators are only allowed to provide psilocybin services. No other services allowed at the psilocybin service centers. Whereas in Colorado, they have an emphasis on prevention versus just treatment. So they expanded it to allow for other wellness treatments in the healing centers, like meditation and mindfulness and yoga, et cetera. And they will use often an analogy like for ski season. Before ski season, you might go get physical therapy for your knee so you don't blow your knee out during ski season, which I really liked because I think that would resonate in Northern Nevada, their proximity to Tahoe. In Oregon, they have a rule that the facilitators cannot diagnose or treat any mental health or physical conditions at the service centers. However, in Colorado, with the clinical facilitator license, they can do that as long as it's under the scope of their license. So when we come to the training requirements, both Oregon and Colorado need to be 21 and over. Oregon is residents only. Colorado also allows for non-residents with priority to residents. Both have to have a minimum of a high school diploma or equivalent. Both must pass a criminal background check. But what is interesting is that with both of these, and they have different stipulations of how to go about this, but just because someone has a felony conviction doesn't mean that they're disqualified. So they look at the nature of the crime and will decide on a case-by-case basis. For instance, if someone has a felony for natural substances, that'd be very different than a conviction for sexual assault. And then both of them have a training program with Oregon, it's the Oregon Psilocybin Services Program, and that's 120 hours of instruction, 40 hours of practicum, minimum score of 75% on the exam. Colorado additionally requires a basic life support certification, 150 hours of instruction, 40 hours of practicum, 50 hours of consultation over a minimum of 6 months with a competency evaluation, and then 20 hours of continuing education annually. So as far as the challenges with Oregon, the biggest criticism tends to be the high cost of services and the taxation structure. They also have had an issue with a lot of the local municipalities opting out. And so Colorado corrected for this in their legislation, so that's not something that can happen. And then with both Oregon and Colorado, there is a professional risk. Although the facilitators might be licensed in the state, for those that hold licenses for mental health and medical, if their state licensing boards are not aligned with the state regulations, there can become an issue with the federal illegality and the risk of losing their license. So another reason that we do hope to get federal approval in the near future. And then with Colorado, they're still in the process of rolling this out. So we don't yet know what some of the challenges they might be facing, but it's expected to have the healing centers online for 2025, and then no sooner than 2026, expanding to the other compounds. And so at this point, I'm going to stop sharing the screen because there are a few other aspects to this discussion that I think are really important to acknowledge. And they go beyond the nuts and bolts of the regulations. As we know, the natural compounds have been around for thousands of years. And for many of us, there's a understandable resistance to regulating them at all. And I've done a lot of soul searching on this myself. The reality is that the counterculture of the 60s and Nixon and the Controlled Substance Act of 1970 unfortunately did happen. And so we are coming out of 50 years of prohibition, hopefully, we don't get over our skis. And there's a global effort to enact widespread societal and cultural change and to revise these policies. But it might be an incremental process and it will require a lot of education. And so I think one of the questions is, what makes good policy? And to quote Dr. Larry Norris, not all policy is good policy. And I think there's a lot of wisdom in that. And I also think there is a case to be made for being willing to negotiate and to compromise with discernment in order to get some legislation passed so that we can get treatment to those who really need it. And so while we're in the process of doing this, there are tricky variables to try to navigate and to reconcile. For instance, how do we make these treatments affordable and equitable for everyone, and also have the programs financially solvent and pay for themselves without handing a fiscal note to the state that's so high that we can't get any legislation passed? How do we keep people safe? You know, the conversation has largely centered around the mental health for a number of reasons. And when we have people with non-trivial mental health diagnoses, it's critical that we have the proper support and training and guidance for them. But how do we decide who's qualified to be a facilitator and who's not? Because there are incredibly gifted and skilled ceremonialists that have been practicing for decades that may not have letters behind their name. And then we might have someone who had a profound healing experience with one ayahuasca session and is eager to bring healing to the masses and may not be equipped to be holding that kind of space. And then we have people who may not have the purest of intentions. And so how do we have appropriate guardrails without narrowing it so much that we're disqualifying people that could really bring so much to this field? We also, this is something I think about all the time with so many things that we can learn from the indigenous cultures. to my best understanding, the medicines have always been used in a sacramental container with guidance, with a proper set and setting, and with experienced medicine men and medicine women. And so how do we learn and apply these principles to our society, and what does that look like? So in all of this, in all the conversations that I've had with legislators and law enforcement, one of the things that I've observed is that at our core, we all want the same thing. We all want our communities to be safe and to have healing and to have wellness. And for those that are opposed, let's say the law enforcement, they have spent their careers trying to keep the public safe, to fight crime, and they've been taught, many of us have been indoctrinated to believe that these are dangerous drugs that can cause harm. And their primary concern, most of them, is unintended consequences. And this is something I can empathize with completely, because I was also a child of the 80s and was convinced that psychedelics would fry my brain and scramble my chromosomes. And so I feel it's a matter of respect to meet people where they're at and listen to their concerns, and to continue to educate, because as we are in the process of really trying to make true change on a widespread cultural level, and to educate, because these medicines, compounds, are not just for those who are suffering, but they have unbelievable potential for personal growth and for the evolution of our collective. So I'd like to close with a quote from the late Roland Griffiths, who truly was a pioneer of the Renaissance with his early work at Johns Hopkins, and he passionately believed that psychedelics can catalyze awakening experiences in healthy people. And he said, we have the potential to wake up to a sense of freedom, peace, joy, and gratitude that sadly, I think most of the world finds unimaginable. It may ultimately mean the survival of our species. And so thank you all for the work that you're doing and for your time and attention today, and to David and his team and Psychedelics today for being a beacon of education and advocacy and helping with this cultural change.
That was fantastic to see the growth of your work in Nevada. Really awesome, and how it mirrored your experience in the Vital course from beginning to end. So thank you, Kate. And I loved how you covered the different variations and options of regulatory change and reform as well. And it's fascinating to think about what is happening, particularly in America at the state level. You know, Oregon was the first, Colorado is the second. Will Nevada be the third? And how, as each state, gets it to the finish line, which is in a sense the start line of their statewide psilocybin or psychedelic project, how each one learns from the past. So Colorado's learning from Oregon, and whoever comes third will learn from Oregon and Colorado, and it's like passing a baton down the line, kind of learning and learning.
And there are 5 states, by my latest count, California, Washington, New York, Massachusetts, and New Jersey, that also have regulated access models in active legislation that are in process too. And then additionally, for decriminalization initiatives, Michigan, New York, and Massachusetts also have those. And so there is quite a movement of many states that are trying to learn as well.
Just interestingly, we're going to go to Q&A shortly, so feel free to pop any questions in the Q&A box, folks. Is there any kind of friendly collaboration between different states, like your Nevada Coalition for Psychedelic Medicines or Psychedelic Working Group in Nevada? Are they having discussions with folks in Colorado, in New Jersey, for example? So they're kind of sharing of best practices and ideas and just supporting each other.
That has been our approach. We've had numerous conversations with Oregon Psilocybin Services and, with folks in Colorado and Healing Advocacy Fund. And so we've asked them they have educated us and given us the rundown on what they've been doing and the regulations and what has worked well and what has not worked so well. And it's been really helpful to get the inside perspective because, and I didn't include all of it in the presentation, but there's some interesting nuances about how the regulatory agencies work together, don't work together, and the importance of keeping people in the loop. Unexpected outcomes when you have certain rules that are included in the legislation, and then things that you didn't anticipate that can come back. And so we found it to be very collaborative, and everyone to be really open and very willing to help and to share their process. And we will continue to do that, especially with the working group here in Nevada, which is in the process of putting the report together, is making sure that we go straight to the source and understand what they're doing over there.
All right, so Kate, I've got a question as well, and if anyone else wants to drop a question in the Q&A box, feel free, we've got time. In the video, particularly, it was clear that there were certain people giving testimony, really either speaking from the heart or speaking from the brain, academia and science and research and data. And so the scientists speaking from the brain and the head. Speaking from the heart were people there who were doing frontline mental health and addiction work, and especially veterans and police officers. So I'm curious, why do you think those folks were willing, one, to give testimony, and why do you think particularly that kind of a testimony is so impactful when trying to change people's minds about something that has a lot of stigma and fear attached to it?
Thank you for asking that. It's huge because my experience is that the individuals, for example, veterans and first responders, whose lives have been changed and have been changed so profoundly that they also feel a sense of mission and I was jaw-dropped by the amount of people who are willing to come forth and to out themselves, so to speak, in the community because they believe in it so much. And there wasn't enough time, in the video to put all of it, but there were unbelievably compelling stories about people's lives being saved, people almost ending their lives and then having a second chance with psychedelic medicine. And they are driven to try to get this help to their brothers and sisters. And by being able to connect on that emotional level and to see somebody who might not have even been there now sitting there in front of you, who is thriving and happy and has been able to overcome some of these challenges that they maybe have suffered with for many, many years, it resonates on a deep level. And especially for people, legislators, for instance, who haven't had the luxury or the opportunity to be, I think for myself, I take it for granted almost that, we're in a community and we're saturated in the understanding and the beauty and the stories of how psychedelics have changed our lives. But if you have not been in that environment, all you've ever heard is drugs are bad. Okay, let's not go there. And then you see somebody and I've heard legislators say this, I know this person isn't crazy. I trust their judgment. They're a critical thinker and I have a lot of respect for them. And if they're telling me this, then it's causing me to question my narrative. And I have to just give huge props to John Dalton, our president, who I referenced earlier, because he's quite brilliant and he's very passionate, and he's also a constitutional conservative, extremely proud of his values. And so he is able to connect both on a mental level and also on an emotional level to say, listen, I completely understand where you're coming from because this was me not too long ago. And this is how I've decided to update my data. And this is how that happened. And here's my personal story. And I think it's human nature to be able to see and hear and understand through story where facts, which are equally important, hold a different part of the sphere. Not that the
Yeah,
stories
it's a
aren't,
really,
you know what I mean? Yeah.
yeah, that's a really good answer. Thank you, Kate. I've got another question to ask, and um, if you don't mind jumping into a hypothetical time machine with me, here we go. So, imagining a future in Nevada, say 10 years after this bill hopefully is passed, what could we hope to expect to see in society and the local communities in Nevada around how it feels? How does it function differently in the future, 10 years ahead, after having this legal access to psychedelic use?
I love this hypothetical question. What I would imagine, because I've started to see it unfolding already, just in what I was telling about the community, and with creating a landscape where therapists and medical professionals are able to start expanding their practices. Many of them are going to psychedelic assisted trainings. We've been pushing the vital training because it's so valuable. And so the local culture has already started to shift from this fringe sort of taboo topic. And again, I think different states, because they have different cultures, some states are more acclimated to the culture of psychedelics than others. And so my hope, to answer your question, is that 10 years down the road, if we have implemented, legalized access program, reduced penalties, people will have started, many people hopefully will have started to be able to have this treatment. Also, many therapists will have been able to become qualified facilitators. And I think that there probably be 1 or 2 degrees of separation from any person who knows somebody or knows somebody that knows somebody or has a family member or themselves has benefited from psychedelic medicine. And so there will start to be sort of like a mycelial network of people where the understanding and the respect of what these compounds can do will begin to infuse the culture, and we will be able to have a flourishing and thriving above ground access program, and to continue to get the penalties down. This is me speaking for myself, not necessarily on behalf of the state of Nevada, but to get these penalties down to hopefully nothing at some point, to an appropriate level. It depends on what makes sense for the state. Right now, reduced penalties is the appropriate place for where we're at with the for a lot of reasons. But if we are able to fully embrace psychedelic medicine as something that is to be celebrated and not something that is to be feared, and also to have everyone on the same page about what proper setting and guidance looks like so people are safe, I think that will do nothing but expand our access even more and more.
Amen to all of that. And there's a part of what you were saying there, Kate, that is radical. Some of it was, I hope that it in 10 years' time is just so normal. Everyone knows about it. It's just not such a big deal. It's just part of what people do. That's kind of what I was reading into that. So yeah, it's a lovely thought for me to just sit with. I've got one more question before I ask it, Kate. I just want to tell folks that Kate is a graduate from our Vital course. We're opening up admissions until August 23rd for the 4th cohort, which is starting September the 17th. It's vitalpsychodelictraining.com, so I'll pop it in the chat here. A wonderful course which now has 5 specialization pathways that you can graduate in, and also a mentorship program that we've introduced since your cohort, Kate. So as a final question, a bit more personal, I'm just wondering what it means to you, Kate, about seeing how far the bill has gone, where it is right now, and hopefully in 2025, where it's going to go to. So how does that feel to you, just seeing this progress and how much support you've got around the advocacy and the messaging and the fighting and the kind of networking and the diplomacy as well?
To be completely candid, sometimes I tear up and I'm overwhelmed with gratitude because it's beyond my wildest dreams. When you first start and you feel compelled to get involved and to help, but for me, I didn't know exactly how to do that. And so this has been a long learning curve. And again, this is why Vital was so instrumental in my personal journey of growth, because of all of these different interdisciplinary pieces with the policy reform and the science and the ancient cultures and wisdom, and many, I won't go through them all for time's sake, but I think feeling a sense of connection with the greater collective and knowing that it's not just one or two or, pockets of people, but that we all understand the importance and we're all wanting to help others because we've experienced something that has changed our lives. And so for me, all I have to do is think about how far that we've come and where we started, and all of the people that have been there from the beginning, with so much gratitude to the legislators that had the courage to put forth the legislation, to my friends that I was working with at Decriminalization Nevada, where we were starting out from scratch and trying to figure out who to talk to the co-founders, John and Bruno, and all of the coalition that have come together, and it continues to grow. And it's just, it helps me to feel a sense of trust and belief that we are on a path and we are working towards something really important. And I've already achieved some things that are very important. So, yeah.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, whatever happens, you've achieved something really important for the state, the community, and for yourself personally. So, Kate, thank you for presenting today. Thank you for all the work that you've done in Nevada. And really, yeah, we support you at Psychedelic today and through our Vital course. We really want to help you. It's great how you're combining the science and the meaning of us returning to our nature. And I love the Roland Griffiths quote that you close with. So I'm going to close with a big thank you, everyone, for watching. This has been a webinar sponsored by the Vital Psychedelic Certificate in Integrative Studies. And I want to say big thank you to Kate Cotter, who is the co-founder and executive director of Sierra Psychedelic Society and the co-founder and executive director of the Nevada Coalition for Psychedelic Medicines. This has been David Drapkin, the executive director of Psychedelics today, saying thank you and onwards. A lot of good work to do. So Kate, until the next time, thanks so much.
Thank you so much, David. Thank you.
Take care. Cheers, everyone.